The morning her father sold her to settle a 20-year debt, Ayanna stood silent as stone while the cowboy counted bills onto the trading post counter. 19 summers she'd lived free. Now Cole Morgan owned her like cattle, like land, like the silver spurs gleaming on his boots. "It's done," her father said in Apache, not meeting her eyes. The shame in his voice meant nothing. Shame didn't undo signatures on papers. Morgan was younger than expected, maybe 30, with sun-weathered hands that trembled slightly as he signed. When he looked at her, she saw something unexpected flash across his face. Not hunger, not triumph. Something else that made no sense. "Mrs. Morgan," he said quietly, and the title hit her like cold water. The town witnesses smirked. Someone whispered about civilizing savages. Her grandmother's turquoise bracelet burned against her wrist, the only thing truly hers now. Morgan turned to leave. "The wagon's outside. When you're ready." When? Not now. Not immediately. The first surprise. Before we continue, please leave a like and let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. The wagon ride stretched through October countryside, autumn cottonwoods dropping gold along the creek. Ayanna sat rigid on the bench seat, her mother's wedding dress heavy as armor across her shoulders. Cole Morgan handled the reins with the same careful quietness he'd shown at the trading post, letting the horses find their own rhythm along the rutted road. "That's the eastern boundary," he said, pointing to a line of fence posts. "Ranch runs from there to those red rocks west." He paused, glanced at her. "Our ranch." The correction rang false as a counterfeit coin. Nothing was theirs. Everything was his. She'd seen the papers. They passed other homesteads. Smoke rising from chimneys. Wash hanging on lines. Normal lives happening behind those windows. A woman feeding chickens paused to stare. Ayanna kept her eyes forward, memorizing the route back to town. Back to nowhere, really. Where would she run? Her father had taken the money. The debt was marked paid in the ledger. "Almost there," Morgan said as they crested a rise. The house sat in a valley cupped by low hills. 2 stories of actual milled lumber, not adobe or logs. Real glass windows caught the late afternoon sun, throwing light like signals. A porch wrapped around 2 sides. Behind it, a barn, corrals, a bunkhouse where she glimpsed men moving about their work. They looked up at the wagon, then away. Morgan pulled up at the front steps. "I'll get your things." "I have no things." Just the dress she wore, the bracelet hidden beneath her sleeve. "There's—" He stopped, climbed down, came around to her side. He didn't reach for her, just stood waiting. "There's items inside, ordered from St. Louis. If they don't suit, we can exchange them." She climbed down herself, not taking his offered hand. The porch boards didn't creak under her feet, solid construction, well maintained. Through the front door, a parlor opened up, larger than her family's entire dwelling. A Turkish carpet covered polished wood floors. A stereoscope sat on a side table next to Harper's Weekly magazines. The Seth Thomas clock on the mantel ticked like a patient heart. "Kitchen's through there," he said, pointing. "Parlor. Obviously. My study's that door. Upstairs." He paused, something catching in his throat. "I'll show you." The stairs were carpeted with a runner that muffled their footsteps. At the landing, he turned left, stopped at the second door. His hand hesitated on the knob. "This is yours," he said, opening it. The room bloomed before her like something from the Montgomery Ward catalog her mother had cherished. A real bed with a horsehair mattress. Quilts in wedding ring pattern. A dresser with an oval mirror. A washstand with pitcher and bowl, decorated with tiny blue flowers. On the bedside table, books some in English, some in Spanish. A coal oil lamp with a glass chimney etched with birds. But what stopped her breath was the Saratoga trunk at the foot of the bed, open to reveal folded clothing. Not Apache dress, not quite American either. Skirts and blouses that seemed to meet somewhere between, respectful of both worlds. The door, Morgan said, and she saw his hand shake as he demonstrated. It locks from inside. See, but never from outside. Never. She stared at the lock, trying to understand what game this was. Supper's at 6, he said. Or whenever you prefer. I usually eat in the kitchen, but the dining room's set if you'd rather. She found her voice. Why? He turned from the doorway, finally meeting her eyes fully. In the afternoon light streaming through lace curtains, he looked tired, older than his years. Because marriage should be chosen, not commanded. The words hung in the air like dust motes in sunlight. He left, his footsteps retreating down the stairs. She stood alone in a room that was supposedly hers, with a door that locked, in a house she hadn't chosen, married to a man she didn't know. The Dresden china plates were set for 2 when she came down at 6, drawn by the smell of cooking. He was in the kitchen, stirring something on the cast iron range. Beef stew, he said without turning. Coffee's ready. Or there's tea. She sat at the kitchen table, not the formal dining room. He served her bowl first, then his own. They ate in silence that wasn't quite comfortable but wasn't hostile either. The clock ticked. The stove radiated warmth. Outside, she heard the ranch hands calling to each other as they finished the day's work. My mother, he said suddenly, then stopped. Started again. My mother was from Ireland. Came here for a marriage arranged by letters. Said her first year. She felt like a package that had been shipped. Took my father 3 years to understand she needed to choose to stay. Ayanna set down her spoon. Your mother left. She stayed, but only after he gave her the means to leave if she wanted. Money of her own. Skills to survive. He pushed back from the table. There's soap from St. Louis in your room. The store-bought kind that smells like roses. Also the regular lye soap if you prefer. Tomorrow I'll show you the account books. You should know what this place earns, what it owes. Why? She asked again. He carried his bowl to the wash basin, his back to her. Because a cage is still a cage, even with golden bars, and I won't be my father. Thinking proximity is the same as love. That night, Ayanna lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the house settle. The door was closed, locked from inside, as promised. Down the hall, she could hear Morgan moving in his own room. Then silence. The clock downstairs chimed 9. She thought about the books on her nightstand, the trunk of clothes that somehow were nearly her size, the way he'd said our ranch, like he was trying to teach himself a new language. Her grandmother had once told her that wisdom was knowing when someone was lying, but what did you do when someone was telling a truth that made no sense? The next morning would bring new tests, she knew. But tonight, for the first time since her father had announced her fate, she wasn't afraid of what dawn would bring. The lock turned easily under her fingers. She tested it once, twice. It worked exactly as promised. Tomorrow she would learn why Cole Morgan thought a woman needed to know about account books. Tonight, she simply wondered at a world where a man would give his wife a door that locked, against him. Morning came with the smell of coffee and bacon. Ayanna found Cole in the kitchen, setting 2 places at the table with blue willow dishes. He looked up when she entered, spatula in hand. May I join you for breakfast? He asked, as if she were the one who owned this house, these plates, this food. The question threw her off balance. She nodded, settling into what was becoming her chair. He served her first again bacon, eggs, toast with butter and blackberry preserves. The coffee was strong, cut with cream from their own cows. He explained. The hands eat at 5 in the bunkhouse, he said. I usually eat alone after, but if you'd prefer privacy for your meals. This is acceptable, she said. The first complete sentence she'd given him. They developed a rhythm over the following days. Morning coffee on the porch, watching the sun paint the hills gold. Him asking permission for small things to sit beside her, to pass the salt, to share the space she occupied. It should have felt false, this elaborate courtesy, but something in his consistency made it real. On the 4th morning, he brought a ledger to the kitchen table. The ranch accounts, he said, opening it between them. "You should understand what comes in, what goes out." She stared at the columns of numbers, the English words swimming before her eyes. She could speak some English, learned from traders, but reading was different. "Here," he said, his finger tracing under the words. "Cattle. Sold. September." He wrote the words on a piece of brown paper, then the Spanish beneath. "The numbers are the same in any language. 40 head at $30 each. Why do I need to know this? Because it's yours too. The law might say different, but—" He pushed the ledger closer to her. "A woman who understands money is harder to cheat." They spent an hour each morning after that, him teaching her to read the accounts, to write basic English words. His patience seemed endless, never mocking her mistakes, praising small victories. She learned cattle and water and profit. She learned to write her new name, Ayanna Morgan. The minister's wife arrived on a Thursday, uninvited and unannounced. Ayanna heard the buggy, saw through the parlor window as Mrs. Fletcher climbed down, her bombazine dress rustling with self-importance. 2 other women followed the banker's wife and the schoolmarm. A delegation. "Ladies," Cole said from the doorway, not inviting them in yet. "What brings you out to Christian duty?" Mrs. Fletcher announced, her eyes already searching past him for Ayanna. "We've come to help your wife adjust to civilized living." Ayanna stood in the parlor doorway, wearing one of the blouses from the trunk cream-colored with small blue flowers embroidered at the collar. Not Apache, not quite American, her own choice from what was offered. "How thoughtful," Cole said, his voice flat as winter ice. "Mrs. Morgan, we have visitors." The way he said it, Mrs. Morgan, deliberate and clear. The women's faces tightened. He stood aside, letting them enter, but his presence filled the doorway behind them like a wall. They perched on the parlor furniture like crows on a fence line. Mrs. Fletcher produced a Bible from her bag. "Can you read, dear?" she asked Ayanna, the dear sharp as a needle. "She's learning," Cole said. "In 2 languages, actually. How's your Spanish, Mrs. Fletcher?" The woman's mouth pursed. "Well, perhaps we should start with Christian instruction. My wife requires no instruction in dignity," Cole said quietly. "She came with her own." The banker's wife tried a different approach. "We thought perhaps some guidance on running a proper household. Mrs. Morgan manages beautifully." Cole interrupted. "The house has never run smoother." "But surely," the schoolmarm ventured, "she'd benefit from understanding our ways." "Whose ways?" Cole asked. "Yours, mine. The territory's full of different ways. My mother was Irish Catholic. My father was Presbyterian. The Mexicans down south have their ways. The Chinese working the railroad have theirs." "Which hour did you mean?" Silence settled like dust. Mrs. Fletcher stood, gathering her righteousness around her like a shawl. "We're only trying to help," she said stiffly. "Then help by treating my wife with the respect she deserves." Cole said, "Good day, ladies." They left in a flutter of wounded dignity. Through the window, Ayanna watched them climb into their buggy, heads bent together in furious whispers. "They'll make trouble," she said. "Let them try." Cole moved to his study, returning with a document. This came yesterday from the territorial office. She looked at the paper, recognizing only her name among the English words. "It's the deed transfer," he said. "Half the ranch is in your name, legal and binding." Why? Always that question between them. Because a woman with property is a person. A woman without is property herself. That evening, as was becoming their custom, they sat by the fireplace. Cole read from Harper's Weekly while Ayanna worked on beading a pair of moccasins not for sale or trade, just to keep her hands busy. The kerosene heater glowed in the corner, adding its warmth to the fires. "The territorial governor is speaking in Tucson," Cole read. "About statehood again." She listened to his voice more than the words, the rhythm of English becoming familiar. When he finished the article, he looked up to find her watching him. "Your mother," she said. "The Irish woman. Did she love your father eventually?" Cole set down the magazine, considering. "I think so." She said love was like learning a new language. First you memorize the words. Then one day, you realize you're thinking in it. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, wind moved through the cottonwoods, a sound like whispered secrets. Ayanna held up the moccasin she was working on, examining the beadwork in the firelight. "Thank you," she said in English, carefully pronouncing each syllable. Cole looked startled. It was the first English she'd offered him voluntarily, without prompting or lesson. "For what?" he asked. She gestured at the room, the fire, the space between them that he never crossed without permission. "For the choosing." He nodded, understanding. They sat in comfortable silence until the clock struck 9. She rose to go to her room. Still separate. Still hers alone. "Good night, Mrs. Morgan," he said, as he did every evening. "Good night, Mr. Morgan," she replied. The response, new, unexpected. At her door. She paused. The lock was still there. Still functional. She used it every night. Not from fear now, but from habit. Or perhaps to remind herself she could. That the choice remained hers. Downstairs. She heard Cole banking the fire, checking the doors, his nightly routine, the house settling into sleep around them. Tomorrow, the banker would come about adding her name to the accounts. Tomorrow, there would be more English lessons, more entries in the ledger to understand. But tonight, for the first time, she had offered him something not required or requested. 2 words in his language. "Thank you." It wasn't love. It might never be love. But it was something. A beginning. Perhaps. Like learning a new language. 1 word at a time. The lock clicked shut under her fingers. Tomorrow, she thought. She might leave it unlocked. Tomorrow. But not tonight. Tonight. The choosing was still too new, too fragile to test. Tonight. She would sleep behind a door that locked. In a room that was hers. In a house where she was Mrs. Morgan, wife and partner. It was enough. More than enough. It was the beginning of possibility. The dawn coffee became their unspoken agreement. Each morning, Ayanna would find Cole on the porch, 2 cups steaming on the small table between the chairs, the pot of Arbuckle's coffee keeping warm on a trivet. He no longer asked if he could join her. She no longer hesitated before sitting. "See that star?" she said one November morning, pointing to the fading pinprick of light above the eastern hills. "We call it where the dog ran. It tells us when the morning will bring frost." Cole followed her finger, squinting at the dawn sky. "We call it Venus, the morning star." "Not a star at all," she said. "My grandmother knew this. A world, like this one, but circling closer to the sun." He turned to look at her, surprised. "How did she know that Apache have been watching the sky for longer than Americans have existed?" She took a sip of coffee, enjoying his startled expression. "That plant by your gate, what do you call it?" "Sagebrush." "Tsa. Good for cleaning wounds, settling stomach pain. The one with yellow flowers there, Gish, helps women in childbirth." He began bringing paper and pencil to their morning sessions, writing down the Apache names phonetically, sketching the plants she described. In return, she practiced writing English sentences. "The coffee is hot. Today brings clouds. The cattle need water." "Your handwriting's getting better," he said one morning, examining her slate. "Clearer than mine now." She had been practicing in private, copying passages from the books in her room. She didn't tell him this, but something in his smile suggested he knew. 3 weeks into their arrangement, she mentioned wanting to plant a garden. "The ground's not frozen yet," Cole said. "We could turn soil this week. Not vegetables for eating. Medicine plants, some from my grandmother's teachings." He stood immediately. I'll get the tools. They worked side by side that afternoon, turning earth behind the kitchen. She showed him how to prepare the soil differently for each plant's needs. Some required sand mixed in, others needed deeper holes, protected from afternoon sun. He followed her instructions without question, even when they contradicted what he knew about farming. "My mother will bring seeds," she said, then caught herself. "If she comes, I'll send word that she's welcome," Cole said, not looking up from his digging. "Any of your family." Her mother arrived a week later with a basket of cuttings and dried seeds, her face carefully neutral as she surveyed her daughter's new life. Cole greeted her in broken Apache, which made her lips twitch toward a smile she wouldn't allow. "You look well," her mother said in Apache when they were alone in the garden. "He's—" Ayanna searched for words. "Strange. Respectful. He asks permission for everything. And at night, he stays in his room. I lock my door." Her mother's eyebrows rose. "Still. After a month, he said marriage should be chosen." They planted together in silence, her mother's hands sure and quick with the familiar seeds. Before leaving, she pressed a small leather pouch into Ayanna's palm. "Your grandmother's healing herbs," she said. "You'll know when to use them." Market day in town required preparation. Cole explained it like a military campaign over breakfast. "We'll need supplies for winter: salt, flour, coffee, fabric. You should choose what we need for the house." "They won't sell to me," Ayanna said. "They'll sell to us." Main Street bustled with Saturday commerce. Farmers' wagons lined up outside the general store. Women in their best dresses clustered on the boardwalk. Children darted between horses, playing tag despite their mother's scolding. The conversations dimmed when Cole's wagon appeared with Ayanna beside him on the bench seat. She wore one of the adapted dresses from her trunk, American in cut, but with Apache geometric patterns embroidered at the hem and cuffs. Her grandmother's turquoise bracelet caught the light. Cole helped her down from the wagon, his hand briefly touching her elbow, the most contact they'd had since their wedding day. "Stay close," he murmured. "But not behind me. Beside me." The general store smelled of pickle brine and leather harness, coffee beans and coal oil. Mr. Henderson, the proprietor, looked up from his ledger as they entered. "Mrs. Morgan," Cole said clearly. "What do we need for the pantry?" The store fell silent. Ayanna lifted her chin, consulting the list she'd written in careful English. 20 pounds of flour, she said. 10 of sugar, salt, baking soda. Henderson's hand hesitated over his order pad, looking between them. "You heard my wife," Cole said quietly. The man began writing. Other customers pretended to examine goods while obviously listening. Ayanna moved through the store, selecting items, Cole following. She chose sensibly seed packets from Detroit for spring planting, new needles for sewing, a bolt of practical wool. Near the fabric counter, she herded a cowhand muttering to his companion. "Cole's squaws got expensive tastes." The words were meant to wound, to reduce her. 6 weeks ago, they would have. But 6 weeks of morning coffee, of learning her worth in ledger entries, of being asked her opinion on ranch matters, had built something in her spine. She turned, locating the speaker a hand from the box J Ranch, stubbled and smirking. "I am Mrs. Morgan," she said in clear, deliberate English. "And yes, quality costs more than cheap goods. My husband taught me to read account books. Perhaps someone should teach you to read. Period." The man's face flushed red. Someone coughed to cover a laugh. Cole moved slightly, positioning himself where the cowhand could see him clearly, though he said nothing. The threat was in his presence, not his words. "Ma'am," Henderson said, breaking the tension. "Will you be needing anything else?" "Sunday ribbons?" she said, moving past the cowhand as if he were furniture. "Blue ones. At the dressmaker's shop, Mrs. Chen," the Chinese seamstress, took her measurements with professional efficiency. discussing fabric choices and styling without the condescension Ayanna had expected. The woman's own position as an outsider, perhaps, made her less inclined to judgment. "This color," Mrs. Chen said, holding up a bolt of deep green wool. "Beautiful with your skin." Walking back to the wagon, they passed a group of town children. One boy, braver than the rest, called out, "Are you really Apache?" "I am," Ayanna said. "Do you know stories about warriors and such?" She glanced at Cole, who nodded slightly. "Many stories." "Would you tell us sometime?" the boy asked, then added quickly, "Ma'am." That evening, after unloading supplies, they sat by the fire as had become their custom. But tonight, Ayanna spoke. "When I was small," she began, "my grandmother told of changing woman, who brings the seasons." Cole set aside his book, listening. She told the story as her grandmother had, with the rhythms and pauses that made it live. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "My mother told stories too," he said finally, "about selkies and fairy rings, creatures that could change their shape, be two things at once." "Like me," Ayanna said. "Apache and Mrs. Morgan?" "Like all of us," Cole replied. "I'm a rancher and my father's son, American and Irish. We're all more than one thing." The clock chimed 9. As she rose to leave, Cole said, "That cowhand today, you handled that well." "My grandmother said dignity is not given by others, it's carried from within. Wise woman." At her door, Ayanna paused. The lock waited, as always. But tonight, for the first time, she left it unturned. Not an invitation, Cole would never presume that, but an acknowledgement that the danger she'd feared lived outside this house, not within it. Lying in bed, she heard Cole's footsteps pause outside her door, then continue to his room. He'd noticed the missing click of the lock, but he'd walked on, respecting the boundary even when it wasn't enforced. Tomorrow was Sunday. They would go to church, where she would sit beside him in the Morgan family pew, wearing her new green dress when Mrs. Chen finished it. The whispers would continue, but quieter now. She had claimed her name in public, shown she could speak their language, handle their currency, navigate their world. More importantly, she had begun creating her own world, neither fully Apache nor American, but something new, a garden with medicine plants behind an American house. Morning coffee flavored with Apache star knowledge, a marriage that was teaching them both new languages. The unlocked door felt like power, not vulnerability. She had chosen to leave it open, just as she chose each morning to sit beside Cole on the porch, chose to share her grandmother's stories, chose to be Mrs. Morgan in the general store. Choice by choice, she was building a self that belonged to no one but her, and that, her grandmother would say, was the greatest dignity of all. November brought the autumn harvest dance preparations to town like a fever. From the ranch, Ayanna could see wagons heading into town loaded with corn stalks and pumpkins for decoration. The sound of hammering carried on the wind as men repaired the town hall floor and steps. Even from a distance, the transformation was visible, fresh whitewash on the buildings, bunting being strung between posts. "Biggest event of the year," Cole explained over morning coffee. "Everyone comes in from the ranches, dancing until midnight, sometimes later." "You'll go," she said. It wasn't a question. "We'll go. If you choose to." That word again, choose. 6 weeks of choosing had not made it easier to believe. She watched him head to the barn, considering. The autumn harvest dance was where courtships began. Marriages were celebrated. The social fabric of the territory was woven and rewoven. Appearing there as Mrs. Morgan would be a declaration. 3 days before the dance, a buggy arrived carrying Mrs. Harrison from the Double Bar Ranch and Mrs. Silas from the box. Ranchers' wives, both of them, with the kind of established authority that came from years of prosperity. Ayanna saw them from the garden where she was mulching her medicine plants for winter. Cole met them at the door, Ladies, what brings you out in a dance committee business? Mrs. Harrison announced briskly. Checking that everyone's planning to attend, the whole community. You understand? Through the kitchen window, Ayanna watched Cole's face remain carefully neutral. How thoughtful of you to ride so far, he said. My wife and I haven't yet decided. Your wife, Mrs. Silas said it like she was tasting something unexpected. Yes. Well, the dancing starts at 7. The ladies bring pies for the auction. I'll be sure to tell Mrs. Morgan, Cole said. She makes excellent pies. Neither woman looked toward the garden where Ayanna clearly stood. Their deliberate blindness was its own message. They spoke a few more minutes about decorations and music, directing everything to Cole as if he were a bachelor still. After they left, Cole found her transplanting a cutting of Apache tea. You don't have to go, he said. It's just a dance. It's never just anything, she replied, pressing soil around the plant's roots. Everything is a test. That afternoon, while Cole worked with the horses, Ayanna climbed the stairs to her room. She had avoided truly examining the trunk of clothes, wearing only the simplest pieces, as if acknowledging the gift fully would mean accepting something larger. Now she knelt before it, lifting out each garment. Whoever had selected these, Cole or some understanding seamstress, had thought carefully. Nothing was purely American fashion. Each piece incorporated something else. A Mexican-style embroidered collar here, Apache geometric patterns there, Irish lace on another, clothes for someone between worlds. At the bottom of the trunk, wrapped in tissue paper, was something that made her breath catch. The dress was silk, deep burgundy, the color of sandstone at sunset. The cut was American-fitted bodice with a modest bustle, but worked into the fabric were Apache designs in darker thread, subtle unless you looked closely. The beadwork at the neckline and cuffs used traditional patterns but with glass beads that would catch lamplight. It was beautiful and strange and exactly right. A note was pinned to the tissue. For when you choose to dance. C.M. She held the dress up to herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was neither the Apache girl who'd stood silent in the trading post nor the American wife she was supposed to become. Someone else. Someone still forming. Needing air. She wandered down the hall. Cole's bedroom door stood open. He was still outside. She'd never entered his space. But something drew her to the threshold. The room was spare, neat. A photograph of an older couple, his parents, probably on the dresser, books stacked on the nightstand, and on the small desk by the window, a leather journal lying open. She shouldn't read it. It was his private thoughts, but her own name jumped out from the page, and she found herself moving closer. November 18th. A. Worked in the garden all day. Her hands know things mine never will, which plants heal, which harm, which must grow together. When she thinks I'm not watching, she smiles at the seedlings like they're children. I've written to the Agricultural College in Tucson for books on indigenous plants. Perhaps knowing the American names for what she already understands will help bridge her two worlds. Or perhaps I'm fooling myself that bridges can be built at all. She turned back pages. Reading fragments, October 30th. She left her door unlocked last night. The trust terrifies me more than her fear did. November 2nd. Taught her about cattle brands today. She asked why we burn ownership into hide. Could not answer adequately. Some ownership is violence, even legal ownership. November 10th. Henderson at the store called her my woman instead of Mrs. Morgan. Wanted to break his nose. I handled it with more grace than he deserved. Her dignity shames my anger. November 15th. The dance approaches. Have put the dress in her trunk. If she wears it, if she comes, it must be her choice. Everything must be her choice. This is the only way I know to love her, by not requiring it. Ayanna stepped back from the desk, heart pounding. Love. He'd written love. She heard his boots on the porch and moved quickly back to her room, through her window. She watched him wash at the pump, water darkening his shirt. 6 weeks of watching this man, learning his patterns. He read poetry when he thought she was asleep. He saved the best cuts of meat for her plate. He'd learned enough Apache to greet her mother. He asked permission to sit at his own table. 2 days before the dance, Cole brought it up at breakfast. "The harvest dance," he said carefully. "You should know if we go, together, as husband and wife. It will change things. People will see it as you accepting this, us." "But if you'd rather not, do you want me there?" she asked directly. He set down his coffee cup, meeting her eyes. "I want you wherever you choose to be. If that's at the dance beside me, yes. If that's here, or with your family, or anywhere else, I want that too. That's not an answer? Then yes." His voice dropped. "I want to dance with my wife. I want them to see that you chose to stand with me, not because of any debt or duty, but because you decided to. But only if that's true." She thought of the dress waiting upstairs, of the journal entries she shouldn't have read, of 6 weeks of accumulated choices, each morning's coffee, each unlocked night, each word of English learned and Apache taught. "I need lavender water," she said. "From town, for the dance." His face transformed, hope breaking across it like sunrise. "I'll go today. And oil for my hair, the kind Mrs. Chen sells." "Anything else?" She considered. "New boots. Dancing boots, not work boots, size 6. He was already standing, reaching for his hat. "Brown or black?" "Brown, with buttons, not laces." He paused at the door. "Ayanna." It was the first time he'd said her actual name, not Mrs. Morgan, not ma'am, just her name, soft as a question. "The dress is beautiful," she said. His smile was answer enough. The day of the dance, she began preparing after lunch. Hot water hauled up for a proper bath. Lavender water dabbed at her wrists and throat. She worked oil through her hair until it shone, then pinned it in a style that was neither Apache nor American, but something she'd invented. Incorporating small silver pins from her mother and ivory combs from the trunk, the dress fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her body, which, she realized, it probably had. Mrs. Chen's careful measurements put to secret use. The whalebone stays of the corset felt strange but not unbearable, creating the silhouette American fashion demanded, while the Apache designs declared her difference. When she descended the stairs, Cole was waiting in his good suit, freshly shaved, smelling of bay rum. He stared at her like she was something miraculous. "You look—" He stopped, started again. "You're beautiful." "The dress is beautiful," she corrected. "No." His voice was firm. "You?" Outside, the wagon was decorated with ribbons and lanterns for the evening drive. He helped her up, his hands careful at her waist. And she saw his journal tucked beside the seat, planning to write about tonight, perhaps, whatever happened. As they drove toward town, toward lights and music and judgment, Ayanna felt the weight of choice settling on her shoulders like a shawl. She was choosing to be seen with him, to dance in his arms, to be Mrs. Morgan in public as she'd been in private. It was dangerous, this hope. It could shatter like ice on a pond, but it could also hold, could bear the weight of two people learning to choose each other. The town hall glowed ahead, paper lanterns from San Francisco casting colored shadows. She could hear the piano being tuned, smell fresh paint and pine boughs. Other wagons converged, families calling greetings. "Ready?" Cole asked. She adjusted the burgundy silk, touched her grandmother's bracelet for courage, and nodded. "Together," she said. "Together." They rode toward the dance, toward whatever came next, toward a future neither had imagined 6 weeks ago when she'd stood silent as a debt was paid. Now she would enter that same town as Mrs. Morgan, not because she had to, but because she chose to. The choosing changed everything. The town hall blazed with light, kerosene footlights casting golden halos through the windows, bunting in harvest colors, orange, yellow, deep red swooped between the posts, and couples already filled the doorway, women's laughter mixing with men's deeper voices. The fiddle player was tuning up inside, the sound threading through the evening air like a promise. Cole helped Ayanna down from the wagon, his hand steady at her waist. She could feel eyes turning toward them, conversations pausing mid-sentence. Her burgundy silk caught the lantern light, the subtle Apache beadwork glinting. She kept her chin raised, her grandmother's voice in her memory. Walk as if the earth rises to meet your feet. Mr. Morgan, Judge Patterson called out, approaching with his wife. Good to see you. And Mrs. Morgan. The slightest pause before her title. But he said it. That's a striking dress. Thank you, Ayanna replied in her clearest English. Mrs. Patterson's smile was thin but present. The burgundy suits you. They moved through the crowd toward the hall entrance, Cole's hand light at her elbow, protective but not possessive. She recognized faces from Town Henderson from the general store, looking uncomfortable but nodding greeting. Mrs. Chen, who smiled genuinely and touched her own silk dress in solidarity. The minister, who seemed torn between Christian duty and social pressure. Inside, the hall had been transformed. Pine boughs wrapped every post, their sharp green scent mixing with perfume and pomade. Paper chains made by schoolchildren festooned the walls. The refreshment table groaned under the weight of pies and cakes, a crystal punch bowl holding pride of place at the center. Someone had brought cut glass cups from San Francisco, and they caught the light like captured stars. The musician's fiddle, accordion, and an upright piano that had been hauled in for the occasion struck up a Virginia reel. Couples formed lines, and Cole looked at her questioningly. I don't know the steps, she admitted. Neither did my mother. First time, follow my lead. They joined the line, and when the music started, Cole guided her through the patterns forward, back, swing your partner, pass through. Her feet found the rhythm, and for a few moments, she forgot to be afraid. Other couples moved around them in practiced synchronization, and if some of the women's smiles were forced, at least they were trying. During the second dance, a waltz. Cole held her properly, one hand at her waist, the other clasping hers, a careful distance between their bodies as propriety demanded. He smelled of bay rum and soap, and his hand was warm through her glove. You're doing wonderfully, he murmured. She wanted to believe him. For the span of that waltz, she almost did. After the third dance, Mrs. Wheelock Fletcher approached, the minister's wife wearing her authority like armor. Ladies' tradition, she announced brightly, too brightly. We always gather the new wives for a little ceremony. Come, Mrs. Morgan. Cole's hand tightened slightly on Ayanna's arm. What tradition? Oh, just a bit of fun. Women's business. You understand. Mrs. Fletcher's smile showed too many teeth. We won't keep her long. Other women were gathering: the mayor's wife, the banker's wife, Mrs. Harrison, Mrs. Silas, the schoolmarm Miss Winters, and others Ayanna recognized from church. Their faces were pleasant, but something underneath made her stomach tighten. It's all right, she told Cole, though she wasn't sure it was. To refuse would mark her as difficult, unsociable. I'll be right here, he said, releasing her reluctantly. The women guided her to a corner of the hall where chairs had been arranged in a circle. Other dancers continued, but Ayanna felt suddenly isolated, as if she'd been led into a trap. The women sat, pulling her down into a chair at the center. Now then, the mayor's wife, Mrs. Thornberry, began. We have a little tradition for new brides, especially for special circumstances. Someone giggled sharp, nervous. We've each brought a gift, Mrs. Fletcher said. Something to help you adjust to your new position. Wrapped packages appeared from beneath chairs, behind backs, plain brown paper, not the pretty ribbons and bows she'd seen at other wedding celebrations. The women's faces were studious now, watching her like cats watch a mouse. Mrs. Harrison went first, handing her a package. For your new life. Inside was a scrub brush, the kind used for floors. The bristles were stiff, harsh. "For keeping a proper house," Mrs. Harrison said, and someone tittered. The next package, from Mrs. Silas, contained lye soap, not the rose-scented kind from St. Louis, but the harsh yellow bars used for laundry. "Cleanliness is next to godliness," she said piously. Miss Winters, the schoolmarm, presented her gift with false sympathy dripping from every word. "We know this isn't what Cole wanted. A man of his standing, forced to take. Well, but duty is duty." Her package held a primer, the kind used for teaching children their letters, with a bookmark at the page showing A is for apple. "Since you're learning to read," Miss Winters said sweetly, "we must start with basics." The gifts continued, each more cutting than the last. A dustpan and hand broom, a book of Bible verses about proper submission, a pamphlet from the Bureau of Indian Affairs about civilization programs. Each woman explained her gift with honeyed venom, their words crafted to cut deep while maintaining the pretense of helpfulness. Ayanna sat frozen, her hands accepting each package mechanically. Inside, something was crumbling, falling to pieces like dried clay. She'd been foolish to think the burgundy dress could make her belong, that Cole's protection could shield her from this. Then Mrs. Thornberry, the mayor's wife, stood with the final package. She held it out with theatrical solemnity. "And this, my dear, is from all of us, for your true position." Ayanna unwrapped it slowly, already knowing it would be the worst. Inside was an apron, not a kitchen apron, but a servant's uniform, complete with ruffles and a small cap, the kind worn by Mexican housegirls in the wealthier homes. "So you can properly serve your husband," Mrs. Thornberry said, her voice carrying across the corner of the hall. "After all, that's what you're really here for. Isn't it Cole needed someone to tend his house? And your father needed to pay a debt. It all works out. Though heaven knows," Mrs. Fletcher added with false concern, "what kind of father sells his daughter like cattle? But then, what can one expect from—" She didn't finish. She didn't need to. The word savages hung unspoken in the air. The schoolmarm leaned forward with practiced sympathy. "You poor thing. It must be so overwhelming, trying to be something you're not. But don't worry. We'll help you learn your place." The women watched her, waiting for tears, for rage, for something they could use as proof of her savage nature. Ayanna looked at the apron in her lap, at the circle of faces around her, and understood with perfect clarity that this had been planned. They'd probably met to coordinate their cruelty, each assigned a role in this performance. She stood, letting the apron fall to the floor. The movement was controlled, deliberate. She set each package down on her chair, one by one, her movements precise as a ceremony. Then, without a word, without giving them the reaction they craved, she walked through their circle and headed for the door. "Well," she heard Mrs. Thornberry huff. "The ingratitude." "What did you expect?" someone else said. "You can't make silk from—" The rest was lost as Ayanna pushed through the dancers, past the puzzled faces, past Cole, who was turning from his conversation with the judge. She heard him call her name, but didn't stop. The cool November air hit her face as she escaped into the night. Behind the hall, she found a stack of lumber and sank down on it, the burgundy silk pooling around her. She didn't cry. Tears would be surrender, and she wouldn't give them that. Instead, she sat in the darkness, listening to the music continuing inside, the laughter that wasn't meant for her. Cole found her within minutes, carrying her shawl. "What happened?" His voice was tight with controlled anger. "What did they do?" She looked up at him, this man who'd tried so hard to build bridges that others were determined to burn. "They reminded me what I am," she said simply. "What you are is my wife." "No." She stood, took the shawl from his hands. "I'm the debt paid, the squaw playing dress-up, The savage you're trying to civilize. That's not... He stopped, running his hand through his hair. What did they say? Exactly. She told him about the gifts, the apron, the carefully orchestrated humiliation. With each word, his face grew harder, colder, until he looked like carved stone in the moonlight. I'll handle this, he said. How? By demanding they respect me, by forcing them to pretend. She wrapped the shawl around herself, suddenly exhausted. You can't make them see me as human. Cole, that's not something you can buy, or command, or teach. From inside came the sound of applause as another dance ended. Happy couples, normal lives, a world that had just shown her exactly where she stood outside it. I want to go home, she said, then caught herself. Back. I want to go back. Not home. The ranch wasn't home. Home was somewhere that wanted you. Cole was quiet on the drive back, his jaw clenched, his hands tight on the reins. Ayanna sat beside him, the burgundy dress that had felt like armor now feeling like costume. The silence between them was different from their comfortable morning quiet. This was the silence of something breaking. At the ranch, she climbed down before he could help her, gathering the ruined silk in her hands. Ayanna, thank you for trying, she said without looking at him. But some things can't be fixed with good intentions. She went to her room, still hers, with its lock that she'd foolishly stopped using. Tonight, she turned the key with a decisive click. Tomorrow she would pack the trunk, fold the dresses that had been meant to transform her into something acceptable. Tomorrow she would plan where to go, how to leave, tonight. She sat at the window in the darkness, still in the burgundy silk that had failed to protect her, and watched clouds cover the stars her grandmother had taught her to read. Tomorrow, she would be gone. Cole searched through the darkness with the methodical patience of a man who understood that some things, once broken, required careful handling. He checked her room first, knocking softly, calling her name. The silence that answered told him what he'd already suspected: she was gone. Her window stood open, curtains moving in the November wind like ghosts. He didn't raise an alarm, didn't rouse the ranch hands from the bunkhouse. This wasn't a matter for posies or search parties. She wasn't a runaway to be retrieved, but a woman who'd made a choice. And he would not compound the evening's cruelties by hunting her like property. Instead, he saddled his horse quietly and rode out alone. A bull's-eye lantern hanging from his saddle horn, throwing circles of yellow light across the ground. He knew where she might go, not back to town, certainly not to her father who'd sold her. There were sacred places in these hills, sites she'd mentioned during their morning conversations, places where the Apache went to think, to pray, to make decisions that would change the course of a life. The night was cold, frost already forming on the grass. His breath and the horses made white clouds in the air. He pulled his waxed canvas coat tighter, wondering if she'd taken anything warm, if she was somewhere shivering in that burgundy silk that had been meant to be armor. 3 miles north of the ranch, near the red rocks she'd pointed out on their first wagon ride, he found the first sign: a small piece of burgundy thread caught on a mesquite thorn. He dismounted, studying the ground by lantern light. Footprints, smaller than his, heading up the old game trail toward the plateau. He tied his horse to a juniper and continued on foot, not wanting to crowd her, to make her feel trapped. The trail was steep, scattered with loose rocks that shifted under his boots. She'd climbed this in dancing slippers, in a corset that restricted breathing, in silk that would tear on every branch. At the top of the plateau, he saw her. She sat on a flat stone that faced east, toward where the sun would rise in a few hours. The burgundy dress was torn in several places, dirt stained at the hem. She'd unpinned her hair, and it fell around her shoulders like a black river. In her hands, she held something: a medicine pouch. He realized. Probably her grandmother's. He stopped at the edge of the plateau, not wanting to violate this sacred space uninvited. I'm not going back, she said without turning. She'd heard him coming, of course. Apache-trained ears missed nothing. I'm not here to make you... He set the lantern down, its light barely reaching her. Just wanted to know you were safe. Safe? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. I've never been safe. Not in my father's house. Not in yours. Not anywhere in this territory that thinks I'm less than human. Ayanna. Don't. She turned then, and he could see her face in the moonlight, not tear-stained as he'd expected, but set with a terrible calm. Don't tell me they didn't mean it, or they'll learn better, or time will change things. They meant every word. They planned it, practiced it, perfected their cruelty. He had no answer for that. It was true. She turned back to the east, lifting the medicine pouch to her lips, whispering in Apache. Prayers, he realized. Or perhaps goodbyes. My grandmother, she said after a long silence, told me a story once about a woman who married a star. She lived in the sky country for a while, had a child, was happy, but she was curious about the world she'd left behind. When she looked through a hole in the sky to see Earth, she realized she didn't belong in either place anymore. Not in the sky, not on Earth. What happened to her? Different versions have different endings. In some, she falls. In some, she chooses to stay in the sky but is never happy. In my grandmother's version, she creates her own world between the two, belonging fully to neither but making something new. She stood, brushing dust from the ruined dress. But that was just a story. In real life, there is no between. There's only Apache or white, savage or civilized, wife or property. That's not what you are to me. She looked at him with something like pity. What I am to you doesn't matter if the rest of the world sees differently. You can't protect me from an entire town, an entire territory, an entire nation that's decided I'm inferior. Then we'll leave. Go somewhere else. California, Oregon, somewhere. Where they've never seen an Apache. Where people don't have opinions about Indians, that place doesn't exist. Coal. He wanted to argue, to promise he could make it better. But the words died in his throat. She was right. He'd been naive to think his protection, his name, his attempt at respect could overcome centuries of prejudice. I'll take you wherever you want to go, he said finally. To your mother's people, to another town, wherever you'll be happier. She turned to face him fully. You would do that? Let me leave. I told you from the beginning you're not property. You're free to choose. She studied his face in the lantern light. And if I choose to leave alone without you, the words hit him like physical blows, but he kept his voice steady. Then I'll respect that choice. Something shifted in her expression, surprise, perhaps, or a deepening sadness. She walked past him toward the trail down, pausing beside him for a moment. You're a good man, Cole Morgan. You deserved a real wife, not a debt payment. You are. I'm going back to pack my things. I'll leave at dawn. She didn't wait for his response. Picking her way down the trail in the darkness with the sure-footedness of someone who'd grown up navigating rough terrain, he followed at a distance, leading his horse, the lantern swinging shadows across the rocks. Back at the ranch, she went directly to her room. He heard the lock turn, that sound that had once meant fear, then trust. Now farewell. He sat in his study, staring at the ledgers where her name was written as co-owner, the documents that legally made her his partner. Papers, just papers. They couldn't make someone see you as human if they were determined not to. He pulled out his journal, writing by lamplight. November 19th, past midnight. She's leaving at dawn. I won't stop her. To hold her here would make me no different from those who humiliated her tonight. Love means wanting someone's happiness more than your own. If happiness for her means leaving, then I choose her happiness. I'll go to town Sunday, not to drag her back, but to make sure they understand what they've done, to make clear that anyone who drove her away has made an enemy of me. It won't bring her back, but perhaps it will protect the next woman who dares to be different. The house will be empty without her morning presence. Her garden will go untended, but better an empty house than a caged bird. I free her as I promised I would. Perhaps that's the only real gift I could give, the freedom to leave. Dawn came gray and cold, matching his mood. He made coffee for two out of habit, then poured the second cup back into the pot. He heard movement upstairs, drawers opening, footsteps. When she came down, she wore the simplest dress from the trunk, carried nothing but a small bundle. She'd left a note on the kitchen table, written in the careful English he'd taught her. Thank you for trying. I free you as you freed me. The garden has instructions for winter care in the wooden box. Tell your next wife the morning coffee is the best part. Eh. Your next wife. The words were a knife between ribs. He found her in the barn, saddling the gentlest mare. That horse is yours, he said. Not a gift. Wages for 2 months of keeping house. She looked skeptical. Check the ledger. I've been recording it. Room, board, and wages, as would be proper for a housekeeper. We both know I wasn't really a housekeeper. You were whatever you choose to define yourself as. That's what I've been trying to tell you. She finished tightening the saddle, attached her small bundle. Will you really go to church Sunday, tell them off? I'll do more than that. Don't make more enemies for my sake. Not for your sake, for mine, for the next woman, for basic human decency. She mounted the horse with practiced ease, looked down at him one last time, in the dawn light, with her hair braided simply, wearing a plain dress. She looked younger than her 19 years. He was struck by how much courage it had taken for her to try. These 2 months. To sit at his table, learn his language, wear the burgundy dress, walk into that hall. Goodbye, Cole. Goodbye, Ayanna. She turned the horse toward the road, clicked her tongue softly. He stood in the barn doorway, watching until she disappeared over the rise. Then he went inside to the empty kitchen, where 2 coffee cups sat on the shelf, and began planning what he would say on Sunday. Not to bring her back, that was her choice to make, but to ensure that everyone understood what they had broken with their careful cruelty. To make clear that Mrs. Morgan, for that's what she would always be in his records, was not driven away by inadequacy, but by their insufficiency. Their failure to see grace when it was offered, dignity when it stood before them, courage when it wore a burgundy dress and Apache beadwork. He would speak his piece, and then he would wait. Not with expectation, but with hope, because she'd said goodbye. Not farewell, because she'd left instructions for the garden. Because she'd written, your next wife, with such careful letters, as if the words hurt her too. He would wait, and while waiting, he would prepare. The room would stay hers, the door unlocked. The morning coffee would be made for 2, even if he drank alone. The garden would be tended according to her instructions, and on Sunday, he would stand before the town and tell them exactly what their prejudice had cost them all. Sunday morning arrived with clear skies and a bitter wind that rattled the windows of every house in town. Cole dressed with deliberate care his best black suit, starched white shirt, string tie perfectly knotted. He tucked the leather portfolio of documents inside his coat, feeling their weight against his ribs like armor. The house echoed with emptiness as he moved through it. 2 days now since Ayanna had ridden away, 2 days of making coffee for 2 and drinking alone. The church bells began their summons at 9:30, bronze voices calling the faithful to worship. Cole waited until 9:45, timing his arrival for maximum impact. He wanted everyone seated, settled, unprepared for what was coming. Main Street was nearly deserted, everyone already in church or staying home to avoid the cold. His boots echoed on the boardwalk as he passed the shuttered shops, Henderson's store, Mrs. Chen's seamstress shop, the bank with its painted sign proclaiming prosperity through partnership. He wondered if they understood what partnership really meant, if they'd ever considered that prosperity built on someone else's humiliation was no prosperity at all. The church doors stood open despite the cold, organ music spilling out. Mrs. Patterson playing Rock of Ages with her usual heavy hand. Cole paused at the threshold, seeing the congregation from behind, every pew filled with the good people of the town, The women who'd orchestrated Ayana's humiliation sat in their usual places, wearing their Sunday best, their heads properly covered with bonnets and small hats. He walked down the center aisle, aware of heads turning, whispers starting. His usual pew, the Morgan family pew, 3 rows from the front, sat empty. He didn't sit. Instead, he continued forward, past the surprised faces, past Mrs. Fletcher, who was already hissing something to her husband. Reverend Mitchell was just opening his Bible at the pulpit when Cole reached the front. "Reverend," Cole said clearly, "I need to address the congregation." The minister blinked, confused. "Mr. Morgan, this is highly irregular." "So was what happened at the harvest dance. I claim the right of testimony." The right of testimony was an old tradition, rarely invoked, that allowed any member to speak on matters of conscience. Mitchell couldn't refuse without cause. The Reverend looked to the deacons, to Judge Patterson, seeking support, but the judge nodded slowly. "Very well," Mitchell said, stepping aside. "The floor is yours, Mr. Morgan." Cole turned to face the congregation. Every eye was on him. Some curious, others already defensive. He saw Mrs. Thornbury shift in her seat. Mrs. Fletcher's mouth tighten. "Good. Let them worry." "3 nights ago," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the sanctuary, "my wife left our home. She left because the women of this town, women who pride themselves on Christian charity, orchestrated a deliberate campaign of cruelty designed to break her spirit." Someone gasped. Mrs. Fletcher started to stand, but her husband pulled her back down. "You called it tradition." Cole continued. "A harmless bit of fun for new brides, but what you did wasn't tradition. It was calculated humiliation. You gave her a servant's uniform and told her that was her place. You gave her a children's primer and mocked her intelligence. You gave her cleaning supplies and Bible verses about submission." "Mr. Morgan," Mrs. Thornbury interrupted, standing despite her husband's restraining hand, "your wife clearly misunderstood our intentions. We were trying to help." "Help?" Cole's voice cracked like a whip. "You planned it in advance, coordinated your insults, made sure each cut went deeper than the last. That's not help, Mrs. Thornbury. That's cruelty wearing the mask of kindness." He pulled out the leather portfolio, letting them see the official documents within. "But I'm not here to argue about your intentions. I'm here to set the record straight about who my wife is, about what she owns, about what you drove away." He opened the first document, holding it up so they could see the territorial seal. "This is a deed transfer, filed with the territorial office 2 months ago. Half of the Morgan Ranch, 3,000 acres, water rights, and cattle is in my wife's name. Not as my property, but as hers independently." Murmurs rippled through the congregation. Someone whispered, "He gave an Indian woman property rights. This," Cole continued, pulling out another document, "establishes a bank account in her name alone. Initial deposit of $1,000, plus monthly deposits of wages for household management." Henderson, the store owner, stood up. "You're paying your own wife wages. I'm compensating her for labor, the same as I would any person who maintained my household." Cole pulled out the third document. "And this registers a cattle brand in her name, the A-M, recognized by the Cattlemen's Association." Judge Patterson cleared his throat. "Mr. Morgan, while these gestures are admirable, surely you understand that marriage itself implies certain—" "Marriage implies nothing without consent," Cole interrupted. "My wife married me to settle her father's debt. She was traded like livestock, and you all witnessed it. You saw a young woman sold to pay an old obligation, and not one of you objected. Not one." The silence that followed was complete. Even the children were quiet. Sensing the weight of adult shame, Cole pulled out the final document. "This is a letter of attestation, also filed with the territorial office. It states clearly that Mrs. Ayana Morgan is a free woman, entitled to all rights and privileges thereof, that any property in her name remains hers regardless of our marriage status, that she may come and go as she pleases, conduct business as she sees fit, and that anyone who denies her these rights will answer to the law. He set the documents on the pulpit, letting their presence speak. You drove her away with your prejudice. You made her feel like she was less than human. But I want you to understand something very clearly. She owns more land than most of you. She has more money in the bank than many of you. She has legal rights that you cannot deny. Mrs. Fletcher found her voice. Rights or not, she's still what? Cole's voice went dangerously quiet. Still, Apache. Still the woman who spoke better English after 2 months than some of you do after a lifetime. Still the person who knew medicinal uses for plants you call weeds. Still the woman who had more dignity in her silence than you had in all your words. He looked around the room, meeting eyes that wanted to look away. She's still my wife, and if she returns when she returns, anyone who treats her with anything less than complete respect will no longer be welcome at the Morgan Ranch. No business dealings, no social calls, no neighborly favors. You're threatening us, Mrs. Harrison asked. I'm establishing boundaries, the same way you did when you drew your circle and put her outside it. Except my circle includes anyone who treats all people with basic human dignity and excludes those who don't. The banker, Mr. Silas, stood up. Cole, be reasonable. You can't expect us to treat my wife as a person. That's exactly what I expect. And before you object further, Mr. Silas, remember that the Morgan Ranch accounts represent 30% of your bank's deposits. I can move those to Tucson tomorrow. The threat landed like a physical blow. The Morgan Ranch was one of the largest in the territory. Its financial withdrawal would hurt. Reverend Mitchell tried to restore order. Mr. Morgan, surely Christian forgiveness. Don't lecture me about Christianity, Cole said. Not one of you showed Christian compassion to a frightened 19-year-old girl trying to navigate a world she didn't choose. You had the chance to show grace, and you chose cruelty instead. He picked up the documents, returning them to the portfolio. I'm done talking, but I want you all to remember something. That woman you mocked, she could buy and sell half this town. That savage you tried to humble, she has more legal rights than your own daughters. That squaw you thought was beneath you, she's wealthier than most of you will ever be. He started down the aisle, then paused, turning back. One more thing. If she chooses not to return, if she decides that freedom away from here is better than wealth near you, then you'll have proven that all your talk about Christian civilization is nothing but empty words. You'll have proven that the savages you fear are more civilized than you'll ever be. The walk back down the aisle seemed longer than the walk up. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the children sat frozen, wide-eyed at the adult drama playing out before them. Cole kept his eyes forward, his stride steady, but he caught glimpses of faces as he passed some ashamed, others angry, a few thoughtful. As he reached the door, someone spoke from the back corner. Old Samuel Wright, a rancher who rarely came to town, rarely spoke in public. The boy's right, Samuel said, his voice gravelly with age. We watched that girl sold like cattle and said nothing. We watched her try to fit in and gave her no help. We watched her leave and felt relieved. That's not Christian. That's not even decent. Mrs. Thornberry turned on him. Samuel Wright, you don't understand the complexities. I understand cruelty when I see it. Samuel interrupted. Been seeing it all my life, dressed up in different clothes. Saw it during the war between the states. Seeing it now. And I'm old enough to be tired of it. Cole didn't wait to hear more. He pushed through the doors into the bright Sunday morning. The cold air felt clean after the stuffiness of the church, the emptiness of the street preferable to the crowded judgment of the sanctuary. He'd said his piece, made his stand. Whether it would change anything, whether it would matter, he didn't know. But at least the truth was spoken. At least the town understood what they'd driven away. Walking back toward his horse, he noticed movement in the cluster of cottonwoods near the schoolhouse. a figure on horseback, watching from the shadows. The rider was too far to see clearly, but something about the posture, the way the horse stood patient and still, made his heart pound. He didn't approach. If she was there, if she'd heard, she would make her own choice about what came next. He'd declared her free in every way the law recognized, given her every tool for independence he could think of. Now it was up to her to decide if freedom meant leaving or if it might, possibly, mean choosing to return. He mounted his horse and rode slowly out of town, resisting the urge to look back at the cottonwoods. Behind him, he could hear the church doors opening, voices spilling out arguments, discussions, the sound of a community forced to examine itself. Some would change, he thought. Others would dig deeper into their prejudice. But the words had been spoken, the documents revealed. Everyone now knew that Mrs. Ayanna Morgan was not property but a property owner, not helpless but wealthy, not trapped but free. And somewhere in the shadows of the cottonwoods, or perhaps just in his desperate imagination, someone watched him ride away and weighed the burden of choice against the possibility of belonging. The ranch was quiet when he arrived home. He tended his horse, checked on the hands in the bunkhouse, then returned to the empty kitchen. The coffee pot sat cold on the stove. Her morning cup remained on the shelf where she'd left it, washed and waiting. He picked up her note again, reading the careful English letters. Tell your next wife the morning coffee is the best part. There would be no next wife. He knew that with certainty now. There was only waiting to see if the first wife, the only wife that mattered, would decide that freedom could coexist with love, that choosing to return held more power than being forced to stay. He made fresh coffee, poured 2 cups out of habit, and sat on the porch despite the cold. The road stretched empty toward town, but he watched it anyway. Waiting. Somewhere between freedom and belonging. Between independence and partnership. There was a space for choice. He had cleared that space as best he could. Now all he could do was hope she would choose to fill it. 3 days passed like seasons. Cole maintained the rhythms of the ranch with mechanical precision, morning coffee for 2, though he drank alone, checking her garden according to the careful instructions she'd left in the wooden box, keeping her room dusted and aired, though no one slept there. The ranch hands went about their work, carefully not mentioning the absence that hung over everything like smoke. On the 3rd evening, as the sun painted the hills gold and crimson, Cole sat on the porch with the unnecessary 2nd cup cooling beside him. He'd taken to reading aloud from Harper's Weekly, as if she might hear him from wherever she was. The words meant nothing. It was the ritual that mattered, the stubborn insistence that she might return to interrupt him with a question about American politics or to correct his pronunciation of a Spanish place name. He was reading about railway expansion when he heard it hoofbeats on the ranch road, steady and unhurried. His heart lurched, but he forced himself to keep reading, not to look up, not to hope too hard. The hoofbeats stopped at the gate, then footsteps on the path, light but deliberate. She stood in the doorway of the porch, silhouetted against the dying light. Not the burgundy dress this time, but simple Apache dress, deerskin and beads. The clothes of her people. Her hair was braided in the traditional way, wrapped with red cloth. She looked like herself, finally, fully. You're reading about trains, she said. He set down the magazine. They're building a line through Tucson. Useful to know. She stepped onto the porch, not sitting, not yet. I heard what you said, at the church. How much? All of it. Samuel Wright was right, you shamed them properly. That wasn't the goal. No. She moved to the railing, looking out over the land, their land, legally, though possession and belonging were different things. What was the goal? Truth. He stayed seated, afraid that moving might startle her into leaving again. They needed to know who you are, what they lost. And who am I? She turned to face him, genuinely curious. According to you. He thought carefully before answering. You're Ayanna, daughter of your mother. granddaughter of a wise woman, Apache by birth, Mrs. Morgan by law, but mostly just yourself. Intelligent, dignified, careful with trust, but generous when it's earned. Someone who knows the names of stars in 2 languages and the uses of plants and traditions older than this territory. She studied him for a long moment. You see all that? I see that and more. I see someone who faced humiliation with grace, who tried to bridge 2 worlds even when both seemed determined to reject her, who had every reason to become bitter but chose dignity instead. She moved closer, standing directly in front of him now. I went to the sacred grounds again, prayed for 3 days, asking the spirits for guidance. What did they tell you? Nothing. Spirits don't speak in words. But I remembered something my grandmother said once. That home isn't a place you're from or a place you go to. It's a place you choose to build. She pulled something from her pocket, the key to her room, the one he'd given her that first day. She set it on the small table between the chairs, next to the cold coffee cup. I don't need this anymore, she said. His breath caught. Because you're leaving. Because I'm choosing to stay, not as your debt, not as your duty, but as your wife if you'll have me. The real me, not the person I tried to be in that burgundy dress. Cole stood slowly, afraid to move too quickly, to assume too much. You're sure? I have conditions. Tell me. She lifted her chin, meeting his eyes directly. We build this together or not at all. Not you protecting me, not me serving you. Partners, equal in decision-making, equal in the work, equal in whatever comes. Agreed? I keep my Apache traditions, the medicine garden, the prayers, the language. Our children, if there are children, learn both ways. Of course. And the town. We'll learn to respect you or lose our business. That's not negotiable. She nodded, then surprised him by stepping closer, close enough that he could smell the sage smoke in her hair. There's one more thing. Name it. This. She reached up, touched his face gently the first time she'd ever initiated contact. If we're doing this, really doing this, then we do it fully. No more separate rooms. No more careful distance. No more pretending we're strangers who happen to share a house. Ayana, I watched you for 2 months, she continued. Saw how you read poetry when you thought I was asleep. How you saved me the best portions at dinner. How you learned Apache words to speak to my mother. How you never, not once, touched me without permission, even though the law says you own me. I don't own. She pressed her fingers to his lips, silencing him. I know. That's why I'm choosing you. Not the safety you offer or the wealth you've shared, but you, Cole Morgan, the man who gave me a door that locked and never questioned when I stopped using it. He caught her hand, held it against his face. I've been waiting to begin, he said, echoing what he'd imagined saying. The real marriage, the real life. I've been waiting for you to choose it. Then let's begin. The kiss was nothing like what either had imagined, not desperate or passionate, but careful, tentative, 2 people learning a new language together. When they pulled apart, the sun had set completely, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Come inside, he said. There's dinner. Your chair's waiting. Our chairs, she corrected. Our table. Our home. They ate quietly that first evening back together. But it was a different silence than before, not the careful distance of strangers, but the comfortable quiet of 2 people who had chosen each other despite everything. 1 year later, the harvest season brought the town to their door, whether the town liked it or not. Cole Morgan's ranch had the best water rights, the strongest cattle, the most productive fields. Business was business, even if it meant dealing with the Apache woman who now ran the ranch's books with an efficiency that put the bank to shame. Ayanna stood on the porch, watching a group of children play in the yard. Apache children from her mother's visits, Mexican children from the ranch hands' families, even a few town children whose parents had slowly, grudgingly, accepted the new reality. They chased each other in a game that seemed to have no rules except laughter, no divisions except who was it. Mrs. Morgan. She turned to find Mrs. Chen approaching with a basket. The seamstress had been the first to truly accept her, perhaps understanding what it meant to be different in a place that demanded sameness. "I brought the fabric samples you requested," Mrs. Chen said, "for the school uniforms." The school had been Ayanna's project, a one-room building on the ranch where all children were welcome, where lessons were taught in English and Spanish and sometimes Apache. The town had resisted at first, but when their own schoolmarm had fallen ill and Ayanna had stepped in to teach, even the skeptics had to admit she was educated enough for the task. "Thank you." Ayanna examined the fabric, practical wool in dark blue. "This will do perfectly. Can you make 20? 20. Mrs. Chen smiled. Enrollment is growing. Word spreads when children come home knowing their numbers and letters. Cole emerged from the barn, saw them talking, and approached. His hand found Ayanna's waist naturally now, no hesitation in the touch. "Mrs. Chen," he greeted, "will you stay for coffee?" "Thank you, but I must get back." She paused, then added quietly, "Mrs. Fletcher asked me to tell you she's sorry for before." Ayanna's expression didn't change. "Tell Mrs. Fletcher that sorry is a beginning, not an ending. She's welcome to visit if she wants to learn what comes after sorry." After Mrs. Chen left, they stood together watching the children play. Samuel Wright's grandson had joined the game, the old man sitting on the porch steps whittling while keeping an eye on the boy. "More converts," Cole murmured. "Not converts, just people learning to see differently." That evening, as was their custom, they sat by the fire, but now their chairs had moved closer, close enough that their hands could touch across the space between. Cole read aloud from a new book poetry this time. Whitman while Ayanna worked on a cradle board, the traditional Apache carrier she was making for her sister's expected child. "I celebrate myself and sing myself," Cole read. "And what I assume you shall assume, for every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you." She looked up from her beadwork. He understood something. "What's that?" "That separation is an illusion. We're all connected, whether we admit it or not." He set down the book, took her hand, an easy gesture now, natural as breathing. "Your grandmother was right about the woman who married a star." "How so?" "She did create her own world between the two. That's what we've done here. Not Apache, not American, but something new." She squeezed his hand. "Something ours." The clock chimed 9, the same sound that had once marked her retreat to a locked room. Now it was just a marker of time passing in a house that had become a home. "Sarah Mitchell wants to learn about medicinal plants," Ayanna said. "The judge's daughter. She's interested in becoming a doctor. Will you teach her? If she's serious, the knowledge isn't secret, just sacred. There's a difference." They rose together, moving through the evening routines, banking the fire, checking the doors, extinguishing lamps. In their bedroom, their shared bedroom now, with Apache blankets on an American bed, her grandmother's turquoise on the dresser beside his father's watch, they prepared for sleep with the comfortable efficiency of a couple who had chosen each other daily for a year. "I never thanked you," she said suddenly. "For what?" "For the speech at church. For standing up when standing up cost you friends, business, reputation." He pulled her close, her back against his chest, his arm around her waist. "You thanked me by coming back, by choosing to stay. That's worth more than anything I lost." Outside. November wind moved through the cottonwoods. The same sound as that night a year ago when everything had broken. But now it was just wind, just weather, just the world going on while they lay safe in the space they'd created together. "Tell me a story," he said. "One of your grandmothers." She turned in his arms to face him. "There was once a woman who was given to a stranger to pay a debt. How does it end?" She smiled, touched his face the way she had that first night she'd returned. "It doesn't end. It continues. Every day. She chooses to stay. Every day. He chooses to deserve her. Every day. They build something new together. That's a good story. It's our story." The lamp burned low on the nightstand, casting golden light across the room where two worlds had learned to exist as one. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, it always did. There would still be those in town who saw her as less than. Still be moments when the weight of being between worlds grew heavy. But tonight, in the home they'd chosen to build, in the life they'd decided to share, they were simply Cole and Ayanna. Not owner and owned, not debt and payment, but two people who had discovered that the strongest bonds are those chosen freely, daily, despite everything that would tear them apart. The lamp flickered and went out, leaving them in darkness lit only by stars through the window, stars she'd taught him to name in Apache, stars that looked the same regardless of what language you spoke beneath them. Tomorrow, she would teach the children, he would work the ranch. They would meet for morning coffee on the porch, 2 cups, 2 chairs, 2 people who had chosen to become one household, one partnership, one love. But tonight, they simply held each other, 2 souls who had found that home was not a place but a choice, renewed each day, strong as the mountains, gentle as the wind through cottonwoods, true as the stories grandmothers tell to children who will someday tell them to their own. "I tell you this story, child, not because it ended perfectly, it didn't. Some people never accepted us. Some doors never opened. But I tell it because you need to know that dignity isn't granted by others. It's carried within yourself like your grandmother's turquoise bracelet, precious and unbreakable." Cole taught me that gratitude isn't about accepting crumbs from someone's table. True gratitude comes when someone sees you whole, your struggles, your traditions, your fears, and chooses to stand beside you anyway. When he stood in that church, risking everything to declare my worth, he wasn't saving me. He was acknowledging what was always true, that every person deserves to be seen as fully human. Family, I learned, isn't just blood or marriage papers. It's the choice you make every morning to build something together. It's teaching your children songs in 2 languages. It's neighbors who finally learn to see past difference. It's Mrs. Chen bringing fabric without judgment, Samuel Wright speaking truth in church, children playing together in our yard without knowing they're supposed to be different. The strongest bridges aren't built of stone but of small choices, each morning's coffee shared, each story told, each hand extended across difference. That's how communities truly change, one choice, one heart, one kitchen table at a time.